Serving God is what I would call positively selfish. Now that might sound like a misnomer, but positively selfish. There's negatively selfish, and quite often we fall into the trap of being negatively selfish. Negatively selfish is when we're looking at meeting our own needs at the expense of other people. But positively selfish, let me give you an example of positively selfish. You're on an airplane. Prior to departure, they start giving you all of the instructions of what you have to do in case of an emergency. One of the things they talk to you about is in case the cabin loses pressure. They tell you that the air mask will drop before you, and they instruct you on how to put the air mask effectively on your face so that you can breathe. But another part of that instruction is very clear, and they tell you, do this for yourself before you help the person beside you. That's being positively selfish. That's taking care of your own needs with the idea that you will be able to effectively help another person. It's also called good self-care. And good self-care is important because if we take care of ourselves and allow God to bless us and to help us, He will bless us and He will help us. And that will impact our attitudes. Here's a thought around that. You see, our thoughts greatly influence our feelings, and our feelings greatly influence our behaviors, our actions, our attitude. And so if we allow God to bless and help and encourage us with the mindset of using these blessings to bless other people, we will have a good attitude, and that will impact our behavior. So taking care of ourselves, being positively selfish, it's important. When Paul was in Rome, he was practicing good self-care. He had Timothy and Epaphroditus with him for a while, and this was really important and valuable to him because, you see, when he went to Rome, his original intent was to go to Rome and to speak and to preach, to teach all of the Christians in Rome, to encourage them and to challenge them. But he ends up being a prisoner. And so having these two people with him, Epaphroditus and Timothy, is good for him. They're an encouragement to him while he might be struggling with his own situation. And at the same time, Paul can be a mentor and a coach to these younger people, teaching them, instructing them. This is a great source of comfort and strength for Paul. But he realizes that he can't stay in this situation. And for their sake and for his own sake, he encourages them to go back to Philippi. And it talks about this in Philippians chapter 2, from verse 19 on to verse 30. And in verse 20, he says it's good for the Philippians because he said, Timothy is one who shows genuine concern. And so he will be concerned for their well-being. So it's good for the Philippians. It's good for Timothy. Paul says in verse 26, it's good for Epaphroditus, who longs to see them again. So his heart is with the Philippians. And Paul said, you should go back and you should be with them. And it's also good for the Philippians themselves because they will be glad. They will be happy to have these people with them again. Paul also states in Philippians chapter 2, verses 19 to 30, that this is going to be good for Paul himself. He says in verse 19, he says, so that I may be cheered. He said, sending these people back to you will cheer me up. In verse 28, he says, I will have less anxiety about your well-being by sending two people who are competent and ready to help you. So Paul is thinking positively selfish. He's looking at the greater picture. He will say, you will be blessed to receive these people as they pass on my instructions to you. They will be blessed to be with you. And I will be blessed to know that you are in good hands. Taking care of ourselves with the intent of blessing and encouraging others. We can get stuck in the trap of just taking care of ourselves and forgetting about the world around us. And that's not a healthy situation. Have you heard the expression, licking their own wounds. A cat or a dog licking their own wounds. And what happens if we let them do that? They can lick the wound raw. They can make it unhealthy for themselves. We took our dog to the vet a while ago. She had been hit by a car, just clipped, but left a gash in her back leg. So we took her to the vet, and the vet cleaned the wound, stitched it all up. And when she came out of the vet's office, she had the cone, we call it the cone of shame, on her head. She was very upset with this, but it was for her own good, because we knew that if she didn't have the cone, she would lick the wound continuously, and then she would cause more damage to it. We need to remember that we don't want to get stuck in the trap of just licking our own wounds or taking care of ourselves. We ask God, God, we've gone through a rough situation, we've gone through a rough time. Maybe we made a big mistake, maybe we fell, maybe we were feeling defeated. We say, God, I need your help. And God promises his help for us. If we look back to Psalm 23, where it says, God prepares a table before us in the very presence of our enemies. He anoints our head with oil. And then the verse after that says, our cup overflows. God will help us. He will provide healing for us. He will help us and encourage us to the point where our cup overflows. And what do we do with this overflow? See, that's when we say, God, help me now so that I can help other people. Again, remember, Paul's intent when he went to Rome was to speak and encourage the Romans there. But he ends up in prison. Is Paul one now who is feeling beaten and rejected and defeated and ashamed because of his situation? Well, let me read from you from 2 Corinthians chapter 11, starting at verse 24. Listen to these words of Paul. He says, 5 times I received from the Jews 40 lashes minus 1. 3 times I was beaten with rods. Once I was pelted with stones. 3 times I was shipwrecked. I spent a night and a day in the open sea. I have been constantly on the move. I have been in danger from rivers, in danger from bandits, in danger from my fellow Jews, in danger from Gentiles, in danger in the city, in the country, at the sea, in danger from false believers. And he goes on to talk about all of the issues that he's dealt with because of being faithful in service. But then he goes on to say too, who is weak? And I do not feel weak, he says. Who is led into sin, and I do not inwardly burn? But he says this, if I must boast, I will boast of the things that show my weaknesses. In essence, what we see there is that Paul rejoices even in his chains. He is not beaten down. He is not feeling rejected. He's not defeated. He's not feeling ashamed. He is saying, I am in chains because I am faithful to Jesus, and I will continue to be faithful to Jesus and continue to do what he's called me to do. And I, for one, am so grateful for Paul's faithfulness, that he didn't spend time in self-pity, but instead he considered all the troubles that he was going through as a reason to boast, but also a reason to keep on being faithful and serving God. I am grateful for his example. I am grateful that he was willing to pick himself up in the strength of the Lord, to dust himself off and to start all over again, to move forward in Jesus' strength. I am grateful that he took all of this and said, I'm willing to do whatever God wants me to do. I will not stop. Jesus said this in Mark chapter 8 and verse 35. He said, whoever loses his life for my sake and for the sake of the gospel will save it. See, Paul believed these words, and he lived those words. He believed them, and he lived them. And he throws a challenge in 1 Corinthians chapter 3. He throws a challenge to us. saying, in essence, what you do, are you willing to stand up in spite of what happens and continue to serve Christ? And will it stand the fire test? What's the fire test, you might ask? 1 Corinthians chapter 3, verse 10 to 15. Listen to these words of Paul. He says, by the grace God has given me, I laid a foundation as a wise builder, and someone else is building on it. But each one should build with care. For no one can lay any other foundation than the one already laid, which is Jesus Christ. If anyone builds on this foundation using gold or silver or costly stones or wood or hay or straw, their work will be shown for what it is, because the day will bring it to light. It will be revealed with fire, and the fire will test the quality of each person's work. If what has been built survives, the builder will receive a reward. If it is burned up, the builder will suffer loss, but yet will be saved, even though only as one escaping through the flames. He's saying, okay, get on with it. Don't let anything stop you. Keep moving on. Keep serving God. But build on the foundation of Jesus. In Philippians chapter 2 and verse 19, he says, I hope in the Lord Jesus to send Timothy to you soon, that I also may be cheered up when I receive news about you. See, I have no one else like him who will show genuine concern for your well-being. For everyone looks out for his own interests, not for those of Jesus Christ. He's saying, do what is right, but do it for the right reason too. Do it because we want to please God. Do it because we want to be faithful in serving God. Paul made that decision. I'm going to send them back. I'm going to get back to what Jesus has called me to do. And I'm going to share Jesus with whoever I can. Even if I'm in chains, whoever I can, I'm going to share Jesus. He's encouraging us to live for a cause worth living and dying for. There's a place in San Jose, California, that we visited a number of years ago. It's called the Winchester Mansion. This was once the private personal residence of Sarah Winchester. Sarah Winchester is the widow of the firearm magnate William White Winchester. And she spent much of her fortune and the rest of her life trying to avoid the phantoms of her fortune. In Psalm 39 verse 6 it says, surely everyone goes around like a mere phantom. In vain they rush about, heaping up wealth without knowing whose it will finally be. But now, Lord, what do I look for? My hope, he says, is in you. She spent her entire life trying to avoid the phantoms of her fortune. She lived in fear and in guilt of all of the people who had been killed by the Winchester rifle. Work started in that building in 1884, and it went on around the clock until 1922, the day of her passing, the day of her death, at which time work immediately stopped. A couple of things to remark about this building is, one, it's a beautiful building. It's a Queen Anne style Victorian mansion. And the other thing is that there was no master plan. When anybody wants to build something significant, you create a master plan. There was no master plan. There were literally hallways that would lead to a wall. There were staircases that led to a roof or a ceiling. There were rooms that had no access point and no exit point. All of this was to confound the phantoms of her fortune. That's what she gave her life for. But Paul encourages us to live our lives with a cause worth living for and worth dying for. We don't really know how to live until we know and have a cause worth living for. And when we choose, when we make that decision to serve God faithfully, it honors God before other people. Peter put it this way here in 1 Peter chapter 1, verses 10 and 11. Each of you should use whatever gift you have received to serve others as faithful stewards of God's grace in its various forms, so that in all things God may be praised through Jesus Christ. When we choose, in spite of our circumstances, to be faithful and serve God, it honors God. And then secondly, it's for our own well-being as well too. I want to take you back to that illustration I gave a few minutes ago. Imagine you're on the plane. You've received all of the instructions, the plane is taken off, and you're flying to your destination. Suddenly, there is an emergency. The cabin starts to depressurize. The masks fall down before you. Following the instructions that you've received, you take that mask, you place it carefully over your face, covering your nose and your mouth so you can breathe properly. Now there's a young child sitting beside you. She is unable to help herself to put the mask on. What do we do? What do we do? Do we sit there content in the knowledge that we have taken care of ourselves while somebody else suffers and we can help them? No, of course not. For their sake and ours, we do what we're told. We put the mask on first, we receive the life-giving oxygen, and then we help the person beside us. We provide for them the same life-giving oxygen that we are receiving. And in so doing, we honor and bless God. And we, in turn, are blessed. Let me close with a couple of thoughts. God still uses people with doubts and fears and pain to change the lives of others. In Proverbs chapter 19 and verse 17, it says this: "Whoever is kind to the poor lends to the Lord, and will receive a reward for what they have done." And in Proverbs 11 and 25 it states, "A generous person will prosper. Whoever refreshes others will be refreshed. People curse the hand that hoards grain, but they pray God's blessing on the one who is willing to sell." God will pour his blessings into our lives. If we need help, if we need healing, if we need encouragement, he will pour our blessings into our lives. But we must remember that he will allow the cup to overflow. And it's up to us what we do with that overflow. Will we serve God and bring honor and glory to his name and blessings to others and ourselves?